Excellent. There we are, we're recording. Hello, everyone, and welcome to Come Fund Me, the series where we talk to trans and non-binary people about their experiences in life and also about the fundraisers that they have going to try and fund these very interesting lives. Please, everyone, meet Evan Tess. Evan, say hello.
Hey, everybody.
So I'm just going to jump straight in here. It seems to me from doing a few of these shows that, you know, and from lived experience that gender, probably for everyone, but in particular for people who are gender nonconforming, it's a journey. It's a sort of an unfoldment. And I was wondering if you could tell me a little bit about your gender journey.
Sure. It's been a long one, to the point where about a year ago, I felt like things were happening fast inside my head. And I brought that up to someone who had known me a long time, and she just laughed at me and told me I'd been calling myself Evan for 8 years already. And maybe that isn't the same as fast. My gender journey, I'm one of those people who didn't have a super strong gender identity young. Looking back, it's really easy to see some signs. By adolescence, I was extremely bad at being a girl, but I didn't know if there were other choices for me. So I just kind of felt uncomfortable for a long, long time. And I was really committed to some really strongly feminist ideals about girls and women and power. And I wanted there to be a role in woman for a person who was like me. So I spent a long time trying to make that a thing. And hopefully other people are still going to do that work. It just turns out I'm not one. So even though that was less uncomfortable than trying to conform to gender, it was still uncomfortable. I'm over 40 now. So when I say it's been a long journey, I mean, you know, I started feeling this way when I was like 12. So it's been 30 years of trying to figure out where I fit, what will make me most comfortable. And then each time I moved away from feminine gender presentation. I cut my hair. I started wearing button-down shirts and ties, and that made me more comfortable, but not all the way comfortable. So every single one of those steps would make things easier without really giving me a solid place to stand. So, I mean, I started calling myself non-binary. I mean, I started binding 10 years ago. Facebook just tossed me the like memory the other day of like 10 years ago on this day, and had the photo of me in my first binder, which was, I didn't realize it had been that long. It was, I actually launched my fundraiser almost immediately afterward because I was just like, it's possible 10 years is long enough for me to be binding and not think about the next step after that, right? And I called myself non-binary. I started going by Evan. I started living in the world in this kind of in-between space that I genuinely love. That was all fine, but I still had dysphoria. I still felt uncomfortable with the shape of my body. I still hated being seen as feminine. All of those pieces were still in that mix as well. And I didn't think of myself as transgender. Like I had an internal wall between me and that space until just over a year ago, year and a half ago, when a beloved trans masc friend, while listening to me talk about some of my gender feelings, said, I know I've said this before, and you get to decide how you define yourself, but also the experiences that you're sharing are trans experiences. You are one of us. And I think I needed that invitation. I needed to be invited to use that word, to embrace that identity instead of just kind of thinking, well, like I have 1 foot in woman and 1 foot outside. You know, I couldn't let myself really go there. So after that, I changed my name at work. You know, a lot of other things happened. When I say things felt like they happened quickly, I mean that about a year ago, I was like, I think I can do a transition thing. I think that's a thing now. And it feels big and it feels fast, but it's been a year of relatively small changes. I changed my name at work. I grew a beard. I changed my pronouns. That's it. And then I started talking to doctors about medical support and surgery.
So when you say that you needed to be invited, why do you think that is? Why would you need to be invited?
Well, the very first time, and this is a sad thing that sometimes happens within our community, but the very first time I tried to explore my dysphoria in a trans context, somebody told me to stop doing that, that I wasn't really trans, that I was taking space away from other people who were, and they were deeply unkind about it. They told me to go kill myself, in fact. Yeah, that is not a super common experience, but it does sometimes happen. And it just happened when I was very vulnerable. And it didn't harm me. I'm resilient, but it did knock me back about 10 years. Like I just put that whole exploration of identity in another bucket. And I spent that 10 years mentoring trans youth. um, Working with kids constantly. I worked at a university for a lot of it. I had a ton of trans students. I was the first person people come out to. I helped them problem solve. I helped them figure out how to come out to family. I helped do fundraisers, all of it while assuming like, I love all of these trans folks and I'm so glad that they accept me and trust me. And isn't it too bad I'm not one? Which frankly, if you're thinking, I wish I could be trans, that's a sign. Maybe a sign. So yeah, it wasn't so much that it was like incredibly harmful to me as that it did kind of, it just made me step back and go, well, okay, maybe not that. Maybe it's not something I need to fight for. And so I think that invitation was essentially my friend's way of undoing a bit of harm that some gatekeepers had done.
Oh,
So yeah.
that's
And
very
anyone can experience dysphoria. Like it's not
yeah.
saying I have chest dysphoria isn't taking anything away from anybody.
No.
So.
Well, yeah, again, I mean, it's the journey because it's so personal, isn't it? It's that there are as many ways to transition as there are people who are trans,
Yeah.
and there's as many ways of doing gender as there are people on the earth, and that's really, yeah.
Yeah.
Um,
Agreed. Completely.
I wonder. We sort of covered on this little voice crack. I wonder, how did you choose your name?
I love this story, but it is so not anything like the usual story. It was about 10 years ago, and I was dressed in what I at the time would have considered drag, including putting on facial hair for maybe the first time, actually. And I was living with this wonderful guy who's my roommate. He became more or less family to me. And he looked at me dressed as a dude and he just said, "You look like this guy I went to school with named Evan. Can I call you Evan?" And I said, "Sure." And it stuck. So like a year later, my chosen name at the time was Tess, which I still use as my middle name, and I still love, but it's a really, really feminine name and it started to feel uncomfortable and I just wanted to have more options. So maybe a year later, I started using Evan as Evan Tess with my friends. And when I went looking for like a name that could be a little less feminine or more masculine or whatever, like Evan was just sitting right there already because Joe called me that. And yeah, he's still a good friend. And when I changed my name like on Facebook and everything, he was just like, "Are you seriously still Evan? Evan?" I was like, "I am, and it's all your fault, Joe." So I
Oh,
was named by a friend of mine. Yeah.
that's a really sweet story. That's really
Yeah.
sweet. Okay, so we've started to touch on this next one. So I want to hone in on this last sort of year that you said, that there's been this sort of a new shift, new developments, things happening quickly, slowly but quickly. And ask about, well, what does that look like for you?
So once I accepted that, yes, I count as trans. Yes, there is something here. I don't have to be comfortable as I am forever. I can change things. I went to my workplace, a relatively new job, and just said like, "Hey, by the way, I have a different name. I'd like people to use. How do we feel about that?" And they got really excited. And I said, "Okay, I do a lot of public facing work. I work with a lot of volunteers. My colleagues and coworkers are fabulous. I think there are 9 of us and 4 of us are trans. It's a really safe environment at work, but it was still, there's just so much to manage that I said, hold off, like we'll figure out how to do this." And then a few weeks later, I went in and talked to our operations manager and I said, "Okay, I think I figured out who I have to talk to and how to reintroduce myself. So whenever you have a moment," and 15 minutes later, she was like, "Okay, it's done. Like your name is updated on all of the systems." And I was like, I said, whenever you have a minute. And she shouted at me and said, I changed your name in my phone 3 weeks ago. We're not waiting anymore. Which was delightfully affirming. Most of my volunteers have been great. People shifted the name. They have trouble with my pronouns. They're mostly, the volunteers I work with are mostly like lovely liberal white women over 60. And so many of them have great intentions and habits of a lifetime that are tricky to break. But the work transition was actually kind of a big deal because I have always compartmentalized my work life apart from my personal life. So my personal life, I've always been this very gender nonconforming person who is just extremely queer. And then at work, I mean, I'm still queer, but I'm expressing it differently usually. So being able to not do that was amazing. My executive director is also non-binary. It's a very, I've never had this much safety and security in a workplace. And that's part of why I could do this. I didn't have to fight work. And then after the name change, not too long after we kind of sorted all that out, there's a pandemic. And like many other people, I used the quarantine to sit and think on some gender stuff and to grow a beard. And something I don't actually talk about with cis folks, generally speaking, is I'm not on testosterone. This is just the beard that my body prefers to grow. I've had the facial hair for 20 years and I've been shaving it off and feeling embarrassed, ashamed, and bad about it for 20 years. So letting it grow in was this really hard, really transformative weekend of, it was hard. I cried, I talked to people. I was basically trying to overcome a lifetime of shame, in 3 days. And then it grew in enough that I had something resembling stubble and I just fell in love with my face. I looked at myself in the mirror. I looked like me in a way I never had. I started taking 10,000 selfies. There are so many pictures of my face now. And I got way into beard care. Great way to not avoid the pink tax is to turn into the kind of dude who cares about grooming, because now you get to buy extremely expensive beard products. Oh my God. But I'm a sucker for it. Like, you give me tastefully masculine decorated sandalwood oil and I'm in.
Well, you're leading straight into my the question I wanted to ask. As we're heading in that direction, I just just sort of like
yeah.
Which was that you have a very enviable beard, and I wanted to know how you found how you went about learning to style it and about the styling process.
I actually thank you so much. It's actually quite patchy and I yell at it sometimes. Like, I finally let you be here and you're uneven. How? For like a month, I had only half of a mustache. The other half did not come in, and you can't be like unilaterally mustached. You have to have both halves. I had to draw it on for a month.
I have the outer half of both on both sides. I have an outer half. I have to shave just like this bit,
just right there,
and let that bit grow just so that the stubble looks like something like even.
I hate those things. But yeah, so the first thing that happened was I loved it, but it was like coarse and it grows in it's just a very different texture from most of the rest of my hair. Hair on my head is softer. My body hair is black and thick and wiry. So it's just completely different from all of the rest of it. So I started asking all of my cis men friends who have substantial beards about what they do for beard care, and discovered that the answer is they're all crap. None of them know anything. They all are just like, I don't know, once in a while I cut it. And I was like, dude, what? I found one guy who was really excited to talk to me about these things and shared every product he loves, which was really funny. He's also setting me up with his tailor.
Fantastic. So a good tailor is so important.
He's just a really lovely cis guy. He's like a straight cis man who was so excited to like welcome me into the brotherhood of fancy men, basically.
Yay.
But other than that, it was a lot of experimentation, a lot of trying to figure out what kind of beard shape I like, kind of like oil, conditioner, like having this hair that like requires this much moisturizing was really funny.
So you did earlier on mention a word that I'm going to like bring us back to here. And that word is dysphoria. And I wanted to ask how dysphoria has impacted you.
It's I actually did a video about this specifically for my fundraiser. So because I feel like we talk about it, but it's very hard to wrap words around the experience in a way that people who haven't experienced it will get. For me, I've been binding increasing amounts over the past couple of years to the point where at this point I'm basically just I'm wearing a binder if I'm awake, more or less all the time, which is not great. But the alternative is that I move or in any way encounter like the shape of my body, the shape of my chest, and I'm reminded in that moment that something's wrong every time. And it's exhausting having to sort of constantly confront the fact that my body's the wrong shape and it just feels wrong. I don't hate it. It's just not correct. And so that moment it's distracting and exhausting is most of it. I don't sit around just feeling bad most of the time. What actually happens is I put energy into getting on with my life even though something's wrong, and that's exhausting. There are some days that are worse. There are some days where just getting dressed is almost impossible, or where I can't see myself in the mirror, or where it's very hard to go out in public because I know what people see when they look at me. Most days, that's actually kind of okay. I don't love it, but it's just another challenge. You know, life is full of them. I can manage it. I live in a neighborhood where people might not know what they see when they look at me, but they've seen people like me before and they don't care. I'm in a very safe place. I'm very happy about where I am and who I am. And my body's still the wrong shape. Most of mine manifests as chest dysphoria. It's really the shape of my chest that's the problem for me. Hopefully it'll stay that way. I'm really hoping it's not like I get over the chest dysphoria and now I discover that there's other things about my body that are a problem, because I don't want that to be true. But this is the big one. It's been true a really, really long time. Back when I used to work outside my house in a place where I had to figure out how to present myself every day, getting dressed in the morning could sometimes take just a very, very, very long time, especially when my gender presentation still varied a little bit more, because I would have to like stare at my options for the day for clothing and try to think like, okay, who am I today? How do I want people to see me? And if I guessed wrong, my whole day could be kind of shitty. Particularly back, I used to, someday if I'm actually seen like as a man more, I will probably want to be the kind of man who wears a lot of glitter. And I like being pretty and sparkly and wearing eyeliner and all of those things. If I was still also dressing more femininely, when people would compliment me on feminine things, and I hated it. It felt terrible. It felt like they were trying to discourage me from being myself. So people who would never compliment a tie, but would always compliment my eyeshadow, were a problem for me. It was just a subtle way of trying to force me into a box I don't fit in. So, but mostly I think I'm glad we have dysphoria, the word, as a shorthand, because for those of us who do experience it, that word encompasses so much discomfort. And I think folks assume it means like we hate what we look like, and it's very much not. For the most part, for me, the only time I think about what I look like is when I'm worrying about other people looking at me and what they will assume, how they will treat me because of it. But when I'm just by myself, I'm not worried about what I look like. It's what it feels like to be inside this body. It feels wrong.
Thank you.
You like nodded and smiled a few times in there, so I think maybe we have a couple of things in common.
Oh yeah. Well, yeah. I mean, I when I leave the house, I'm in a binder. I don't usually wear one at home at this stage. But I go down with the chest dysphoria. I had a pretty shitty week last week of intense chest dysphoria, and it's just yeah. So I have two arrangements of binders. I've got the one that I'm wearing right now, which is super tight and it can be worn on its own. But for me, it's not suitable for working. It's too tight to wear while working because work's a bit physical and it impedes my breathing a bit too much. So then I also have two slightly looser fitting binders that I wear one on top of the other for when I'm at work. But then I'm constantly adjusting myself and like very self-conscious of them not fully doing the job.
The one I'm wearing right now is a little bit loose. It's good for like wearing at home all the time. But if I wear it out in public, then I'm constantly thinking like, okay, where's the flesh right now? And do I need
Yeah,
to move it? It's not in the
yeah.
right place. Yeah.
I actually had a nightmare the other night, which was that I had gone on a date, and my date was perfectly lovely, and I was wearing the two binders, but I was aware that they weren't sitting quite right. So I went to find a bathroom to reposition them. Only the room that I found had like a toilet in this really big sort of storeroom and no lock on the door. And then all these people just kept coming in while I was trying to fix my binder, and it was super stressful. And I was like trying to get them all to leave, and then just more would come in. And then like finally my sister came in, and I asked her if she could just guard the door and stop people from coming in, and then tried to usher the people that were still in there out just so I could fix.
That's a really trans nightmare.
Yeah, yeah, it was pretty horrible. It was
I'm
pretty
so
horrible.
sorry, but I'm smiling because I'm just like, oh yeah, no, we all those that resonates like really hard
Yeah,
for sure.
it was just sort of on the end. Yeah, I think like I do take testosterone, and my T levels had dropped, and and then you know certain things can be more emotional than when that happens. And yeah, it's just been a few days of the sort of more gripping dysphoria, you know, as opposed to my bathroom mirror cuts off here, you know, just fine.
I do a lot of videos that are right here.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I'm very comfortable with my face. Yeah, I think part of what there's like degrees of dysphoria where there's my goal with my binders is to have my dysphoria be background that I don't have to think about. So I know which binders I'm wearing. I wear them. I don't have to think about it too hard. And then I don't have to think about my chest all day. That's it. I just want to not have to think about this.
Yeah.
Um, Someday, I mean, what I really want is to be able to put on a shirt without having to sit and think about what it will fit like, what it will make me look like, what it will feel like. And I just thought about the other day, I thought about getting up and putting on a t-shirt and started crying. Like I kind of happy tears, tears at the idea that someday I might be that happy, which is astounding. That thought could be that profound. Someday I can just put a shirt on. And I was like, what? And yeah, yeah.
This you've just exactly explained the reason why when I see people post that they've just had top surgery, um, I don't get even slightly jealous. I just get so excited for them. I get like ridiculously excited for them because I have this sort of like vicarious joy of imagining the freedom that they have now, and
I,
it's
I've
almost like
loved
tear up. Yeah.
for years. I used to tell the guys I knew, I'd be like, are you going to make the joke? Because there's a handful of them, you know,
Yeah.
and like, I love going along for that ride vicariously. Yeah. And now that I'm trying to schedule it for myself and hitting some gatekeeping issues, and it's a little, there is a twinge now when like there's a guy I just met on Twitter like 3 days before his top surgery. He's a riot, and I've been loving following along with his posts. He's just this lovely guy, and I'm genuinely enjoying it. There is a shadow to it now that there wasn't a couple of years ago, because now there's my own fear that I'm not going to make this happen is wrapped up in my joy for other people. But I think the joy still wins out because it's just so beautiful watching. It's just the amount of like a transcendent joy. That one and the like tried on your first binder moment. I've gotten to play Binder Fairy for a bunch of people over the last couple of years, and especially last spring, I think I gave away, I don't know how many. I sent a lot of binders to a lot of people, and a lot of the time they would send me a video of the first time they tried it on, and the amount of the joy in those videos is just impossible to even describe. It's so transcendent. It's so glowing. I remember thinking I almost feel bad for cis people that they don't get this, you know, they don't get that moment, and they don't get to see that moment. And in my case, they don't get to be the person who helped make that happen. So
Yeah,
yeah,
that's wonderful. What a thing to be able to do.
yeah,
Um, And
every now and then when I'm financially secure, it's really nice to be able to throw money at people.
wow. You kind of segued nicely. I wanted to ask you, because we're talking about the fact that you're building up to it. What is the medical path for you, and what obstacles do you face in that path?
I have a surgeon that I quite like, who does this kind of surgery pretty regularly, and he's really matter of fact and chill about it all, and is very happy to work with me. The practice he works for, however, has a bunch of hoops that I have to jump through, including they initially said I needed to have 12 sessions with a therapist. I raged about that a little bit because that is a ridiculous requirement. I've now met with a couple of different therapists who are trans guys who are happy to meet with me a couple of times and then write a letter saying I don't require therapy. If you do require therapy, please get therapy. I'm a therapy graduate. And 12 sessions with any therapist would be a waste of my time and the therapist's, no question. So that piece I'm getting out of the way. I have a doctor that needs to sign off. I think she will, but she's completely clueless. I think she'll just write anything I ask her to on a piece of paper, but she genuinely doesn't know. I asked for like somebody who could do trans health support, and they gave me a doctor who has never, I think, like met a trans person, but is nice about it. Which is not ideal. I had to explain to her why the fact that I'm binding like 18 hours at a time is bad. And then I had to say like, but I'm not wearing anything that restricts my breathing for that long. But it's still not great for my skin. Like, let's go with that, right? This isn't good. I'm being careful, but it's still not good. Please, let's do something about it. And then I had to explain why it was a problem. And then I showed her my binder because she'd never seen one. So my doctor, my primary care doctor, is very nice and will probably do anything I ask her to, but isn't a resource for me in any real way. So in theory, if I can get all of that together, and I'm in the US, our insurance system is a mess. If my insurance will cover this, that would be great. They might not, in particular, because I'm not on T and I don't want to be. A lot of our insurance companies will only cover surgery if you've been on hormones for a year. I, at this point in my life, don't have a desire to go on testosterone. I have the facial hair that I want. I do want a lower voice. Like I have voice dysphoria sometimes, but I'm also a voice actor and I don't want to change. There's a piece of that where I both do and don't want my voice to change. And then that would be the primary effect of T right now in my life. That and like acne and sweat. It's not super high on my list of things I want to do. So, you know, I don't want to go on T for a year and not take it in an attempt to get an insurance company to cover a surgery they wouldn't otherwise cover. Like that's bullshit. So I'm kind of in the space where there's a lot there I don't know. What I really want, I want, you know, top surgery, and I've talked that through. And I think at that point I might be sort of done. I think that might be enough. I keep telling folks who want to talk about more medical transition stuff, like, give me top surgery and ask again in a year. Like maybe I will discover that I have other dysphoria and I want to talk about fallow, or that I have changed how I feel, like how I feel about my voice is changing, and I do want to look at T. You know, like those things are possible. But right now it's really just the surgery, and the obstacles between me and it are really just US medical system doesn't like to let people decide what to do with their bodies. So there's 8 or 10 people I have to convince before they will let this thing happen. And then that's without the funding. Insurance is about the money, but the practice itself has policies. And it was a particularly hard day because my surgeon, when I met with him for the consultation, was totally like, yeah, let's just schedule you.
Yeah.
He's met people like me before. He asked a bunch of really good questions about my identity, how long I'd wanted this, you know, things like that.
Yeah.
But he found me, I was like, 20 years? I've wanted this about 20 years. Mm-hmm. Can we do it now? And then he just sat there and like, you know, did measurements, explained details of surgery, tried to figure out how I felt about scarring versus other kinds of, you know, that conversation. And I felt really great coming out of that meeting. And, you know, the practice manager called me and was like, actually, we can't do it until we have, you know, you must be seeing an endocrinologist. And I'm like, I'm not, in fact, seeing an endocrinologist, and I don't see any reason why I should. So.
I mean, maybe if
You
they're
know,
hot.
I mean, I've met some pretty cool endocrinologists, but if there's this pandemic thing happening right now that
Oh,
makes
right.
getting doctors real tricky. Like, I don't know. Yeah. So the whole, in theory, it's going fine. In reality, a couple of months ago, it looked like I might be able to schedule before the end of the calendar year, which I was really excited about. And now it's looking like spring, maybe February if I'm lucky. But it's still quite soon.
Exciting.
After 20 years, it feels soon. It just also doesn't
Totally.
enough.
It's exciting. Really
Yeah.
exciting. Um,
Yes.
I want to ask you about your pretty amazing family.
A family of choice, yes. What about them?
Well, maybe, from the perspective of the audience that just doesn't know.
So, I mean, I have a pretty huge amount of chosen family that I've acquired over the years. I have 3 kids that I acquired in different ways. They all have different moms. And that's like way less scandalous than it sounds. So, daughter Eliza is 22. Her mom and I broke up when she was 4. Uh, she picked me as her dad, and I've been in her life a really long time. So, and then she divorced her father of origin, like her original father, a few years ago, because he's terrible. So, she's 22. She's amazing. I've got a 6-year-old who is also amazing, Ruby. Her mom and I share an ex. And so, yeah, that's how that happened. Who's not great. So basically I have kids because their original parents were at least partly, not good at being parents. And they had a parent-shaped hole in their lives that I walked into, and they chose me. So Ruby wasn't even 2 yet when she started calling me Papa. And we're currently not living in the same state, which is really hard because she used to live with me half time. Her mother and I are very good friends and talk a lot, talk every day. And we're trying to arrange a couple visits a year. So, and then Sawyer, my most recent acquisition, is 20 years old and has been my son for a year. He just started calling me dad, and I was like, which a lot of people do. I'm basically everyone's dad. But in this case, there was something in him that we just clicked, and I asked him if he wanted that to be real. It's just like, do you want to actually do that? And he said, yeah. So we actually had a phone call and talked about what it would mean to be family and adopted each other. So it's an unusual one because it's basically 2 adults deciding what kind of relationship they want and deciding that that's a parental relationship. And his mom is my creative partner, Caroline. So basically I have 3 kids. They have 3 moms. All of us are family to each other. At this point, they all know each other because of me as well. The kids have never met each other, but they all adore each other, and it's hilarious. Ruby, the 6-year-old, calls Sawyer Papa's boy, and he's a performer, so she makes me show her videos of him singing and dancing. And Sawyer and Eliza, who are pretty close to the same age, gang up on me regularly. Which is really cute and really sweet. And they've already made plans for what they're wearing to each other's weddings. They're both ace. I don't think either one of them is planning on getting married anytime soon, but they have their dresses/suits completely planned out. So these are my kids. They're amazing. I never shut up about them. Also, Eliza is pan. Soy is a gay trans man. In Soy's case, that was true before he met me. In Eliza's case, I've been along for the ride of her figuring that out, which has been quite cool. Jury's still out on Ruby. She is 6 and has asserted very little about her identity, except that she is a girl. She told us that when she was 2. She told me she was trying to understand pronouns because she was 2.5.
Yeah.
And she always waited till I was driving and she was in the car, and then she would ask me Papa, what happens when you die or whatever?
Right.
It saved the big questions for me driving.
Right.
But she asked about when people use he and she, and I was trying to explain. And she thought about it for a bit, and then she said, I am a little bit boy, but more girl. I use she. And I was like, you are great.
Yes.
But yes, baby, that is so good. Thank you for telling me. And she also told, we were living in Eastern Washington State on the border of Idaho, and we went to a lot of playgrounds in North Idaho. And I swear she told every other parent in Idaho, my papa is a boy and a girl. Which I gotta say, I didn't ever want her to feel ashamed of any of that. I didn't want her to think it was a problem. I didn't want her to have to not tell people. And that was so important to me. But I was like, I feel so safe right now. Just smile and nod and hope that they, you know, and some of them were fine and some of them were less fine. So nobody ever did anything particularly terrible because there was a batch of 3-year-olds playing right there and everything. But yeah, she told like literally everybody she saw because she thought it was so cool.
Oh, that's so darling.
She's getting big. She decided she doesn't want to have long hair like Rapunzel anymore. So she just got a bob. Her mom was just like, Ruby got all her hair cut off because we believe in bodily autonomy in this household. But we miss her hair.
It's so important.
Yeah, those are my kids. It's I didn't come from and don't have a particularly supportive family of origin. Like that is still a difficult story for me. Like actively right now, my brother is trying to figure out how to explain me to his daughter so that he wants us to have a relationship, but he doesn't want her to know that trans people exist. I haven't figured out, she's 8. I haven't figured out how I'm doing, if we're doing any, I don't know what we're doing for Thanksgiving. It was the hardest damn phone call, like just wrecked me. From his perspective, he's trying. From my perspective, he thinks I'm abnormal and my existence harms children. I don't know how to balance those things, but having that is just part of why I think I've spent my life finding ways to be family to other people. So everyone's dad. Like one of the coolest things about getting older is I aged into like that role. And now like a number of young people, somebody I didn't even know thought of me as dad, like one of Sawyer's best friends, back during the height of the Black Lives Matter protests, texted me one day and was just like, Dad, I just got tear gassed and I need a hug. And I was like, sweetie, I'm really proud of you. Are you okay? You get a hug. But I was like, I didn't know you thought of me that way. Like, I didn't realize that they put me in that same category. So I got tear gassed while helping out the street medics because my kids are awesome.
Yay. That's so uplifting. Okay, so while we're here, I understand that you had a really interesting conversation with your son, Sawyer, about fundraising in our community. And I wonder if you could tell us that story.
Yeah. I mean, he also eventually wants surgery and other, he's still a ways off from being ready for any of that. But we were talking through things and I was talking about my feelings about asking people for help via fundraiser when I have a good job and I just still can't afford this surgery, and that it feels awkward, because it does. But it doesn't feel as awkward as it would otherwise because I have been part of and contributed to 8 million of these. I am so used to seeing the GoFundMe or whatever to attempt to fund gender confirmation surgeries because they're so rarely covered by any kind of insurance. It's just so common. And I was talking about that and he said, yeah, gender confirmation surgery fundraisers are queer culture. And I was like, oh shit, you're right. Like this is something that we expect people to do. Yeah. It's like a workaround that I know we wish we didn't have to, but while we live in this system we live in, basically anywhere you are, there's a problem. And we're all trying to figure out how to support each other. And asking for help in general and asking for financial help is genuinely really hard for me. It's not a thing I like doing. And this one's easier than other kinds because I can look at it and go, yes, I need this. Other people have also needed this. I'll help them too. We all help each other. It doesn't feel quite as much like, it feels like an expected form of asking for help. So I loved that he put it that way because I was just like, yeah, this is one of our forms of cultural expression. I need a form of surgery I can't afford. Hi. And it's genuinely a little easier to do it. Somebody who is like a straight person, I had mentioned my fundraiser to, had asked like, oh, but don't you have like other ways, or isn't it weird to ask for other people to pay for your surgery? And I was like, not really. People won't give if they can't, and they will if they can. And I know when I've contributed to similar things, it's because it feels good to go along for that. It's good to be in a position where I'm able to help, and I'm hoping other folks feel that too. But it doesn't feel this, I don't know. There's a lot of reasons people might need to ask for help. This one feels expected. Like there's room for it. We understand how it works. So when you said it's a form of queer culture, it's because it's like an understood thing. Like, yeah, that's a thing that happens, which genuinely was helpful. Kids got a real knack for putting the right words around things sometimes.
It's this unseen thing, you know, like that except within our community, people will broadly just expect that because there's universal care here in the UK, that means that people can get the treatments that they need. And it's just not the case.
Yeah, I've been following along, and because I have so many UK trans friends now, I don't know quite how that happened, but our systems are definitely different kinds of broken.
Yeah,
And
absolutely.
I think being able to see that, and it's been really eye-opening for me. I didn't know a lot about what trans-specific healthcare looked like in the UK. And then I think the pandemic has made it so much worse.
Yeah.
But yeah, I didn't know those details, and I've learned a lot this last half year or so. Yeah, I don't know if there's anywhere in the world that treats us particularly well. Here, if you have enough money, you can do almost anything. But if you don't have, and it's a lot of money, if you don't have a lot of money, then it's all, there are trans community organizations here, tons of them, whisper networks and more official ones, where a ton of what it is just, are there any doctors in this area who will prescribe hormones?
Yeah.
And sometimes the answer to that is like, there is one.
Yeah.
And then everybody has to try to go to that one person who will start you on hormones, or whatever. Where I was living until quite recently, so for 10 years, we had a surgeon decide to come into the area to do gender confirmation surgeries, because there had been nobody, for huge chunks of the US, there's no one who will do them.
Right.
And for him to do those surgeries at our local hospital, there had to be a public hearing process for the hospital to approve it. And that took a long time and was a mess. I was involved. The hospital staff were mostly great, but a couple of them weren't. A local religious organization got involved and tried to block it all. He's a really lovely plastic surgeon who does elective surgeries in order to be able to afford to do less elective surgeries for cheap. So he started out working with people who are burn victims. Then he discovered gender confirmation surgeries. He lets you pick what music he'll listen to while you're under. He's a riot and a really great guy, and has done, I know so many people who've gone under his knife. But for him to even get admitting privileges at the hospital took like a year. There are no more risks to the kinds of surgeries we're talking about than anything else, and frequently less. Someone was asking me about top surgery risks, and I was like, I think it's the least risky plastic surgery. It's certainly one of them. There's not a lot here that any other surgery doesn't have. So yeah, it's unequally distributed in a pretty significant way. Now I live in a small city, but it's the largest city in my state, and there are a lot more services here. So I have opportunities to get kinds of medical care that I couldn't have gotten for the last 10 years because there were literally no doctors in my area. Like, and by my area, I mean within 100 miles, who would, I mean, if I'd wanted to go on T, I would have had to drive 100 miles to do it.
Wow.
Yeah.
It's a lot of miles.
It's ridiculous. God, if you're in the UK, it's a lot of miles.
Oh yeah. Yeah. That's
I'm lucky now. Like I moved back, this is where I'm from.
Yeah.
And I've been thinking, like, why didn't I transition earlier? And then I think about my life, and I live in an accepting city. I work in a place where I'm not weird. I am surrounded by, I have a support network. I have all the things in place that I didn't have 10 years ago. Even 3 years ago, this would have been an uphill fight, and I don't think I was ready to fight it. So I'm really fortunate right now, and that's why I can do this.
Okay, well, let's talk about this. Let's talk about your fundraising. How much do you need to get out of Binders for Good?
So I threw my target at $12,000, which is roughly what I'll need if insurance doesn't come through. If my insurance does come through, it's still going to be between $3,000 and $5,000. So I've raised about 2,000 so far, which is amazing. I um I can fund some of this. Like I said, I have a good job. I'm okay, but also I pay $1 million in rent, so I don't live. I'm not living comfortably enough that I can just save up for a while and have $12,000. So if I do raise that much and then my insurance comes through, I will redonate to other people's fundraisers, so that money stays out there and continues to do the same work. But yeah, that's what I'm looking for. One of the other fun quirks of the US healthcare system is you don't know how much things will cost because no one will tell you. You can't ask how much. No, they will not. You cannot ask for surgical costs up front. You can't ask for, they won't even give you a range, generally speaking. So what you have to do is look for other people who've had that surgery, figure out what they paid, come up with what the average is, and then look at your insurance to see how much they might cover. In my case, they'll cover 70%, plus I have this rather high deductible I have to pay. So yeah, no, it's great. Our healthcare system's amazing. It's terrible. Everything costs a ridiculous amount of money. Every time I go in for a consultation, it costs me $75 that my insurance doesn't cover. Every medical appointment costs me about $50. So like that's just standard. That's just, I have insurance. That's the standard with insurance here. So when I say I'll need maybe $3,000 to $5,000 if everything goes well, and like 12 if it doesn't, those are guesses based on what other people have paid for similar procedures.
Right.
My actual surgeon won't give me an estimate. They don't do that.
Ay. Well,
I love telling people that. It costs like $30,000 to have a baby here.
that's just mad. Yeah, it all adds up to, you can't really transition unless you're independently wealthy.
Right. I feel everybody who's the UK, when you do go private, what you end up with is a system a great deal like ours.
Yeah.
And it's not good. So
No.
yeah, my entire state, if people don't love, like they look at me and get confused or whatever, they both basically mostly keep it to themselves. It's culturally inappropriate here to be like mean about something like that. So even if people aren't trans friendly, they're not super hostile.
Yeah.
Which was true 20 years ago when I was doing gay rights work here too. There were plenty of people who were uncomfortable with gay people, but they'd say things like, "What business is it of mine?" and move on.
Yeah.
And I'll take that. That's great. Cool. We'll go start there.
Yeah.
That's fine. So. My next door neighbors, I live in this city, and my next door neighbors have a 4-year-old who talks my ear off, and they are a lovely, as far as I know, straight couple, cis couple, and their 4-year-old wants to talk to me about his life constantly, and they just told him, "That's Evan, that's our neighbor," and I don't pass as anything, and I know that, and these neighbors were just like, "Cool, it's nice to meet you, this is our kid, he's going to tell you all about his life, I hope you don't mind."
Yeah.
I was just like, I love this. This is all I want. This is all I want.
The future that we could have, that we hope for.
I just want to be people. That's just it. I just want to be your neighbor.
Yeah.
Chat about whatever.
Yeah.
The 4-year-old tells me everything he's thinking about always because he's 4, and it's adorable. And his parents have like apologized before. And I'm like, no, I love this. Like, I miss my kid. And there's a lot of like, if there wasn't a pandemic, we would already be asking you to babysit. And, you know, like, cool. These people can be trans accepting, and it's not a big deal. They don't look at me and see a threat to their child. They look at me and see, wow, that person's willing to talk to my kid while I unload the groceries.
Yeah. To be seen as a human being. This is the dream. It's the dream, isn't it?
It is. I wish it wasn't. But it still feels really, really good when it happens.
Absolutely. Well, I want to say a big thank you to everyone for tuning in to learn Evan Tess's story. Please find the link for Evan's funding in the link box description thing. I really appreciate anyone who feels compelled to share the video, and please subscribe to the channel so that we can get the message out to a broadening audience. Thank you very, very much. I love you. This has been Etienne.
Thank you, Etienne, and thank you everybody for tuning in.